Hello, it's me, Aaron, and today I wanted to talk about something I've recently noticed about Bloodborne, or more accurately, something I've felt: rough edges. The game feels somehow unfinished, so much potential oozes out of it, and I wanted to share these thoughts I've had. Today, we'll talk about everything in Yanam that to me feels unfinished. We'll speculate a lot about what could have been and how they could have been expanded on, but also flawed concepts and how to fix them. And of course, got content. So yeah, this is a pretty lengthy video, and I'll talk about how features could be expanded on a lot, and I'll talk a lot in general. So feel free to skip throughout the video if you don't want to hear about what could have been and only me talking about factual things in the game. So yeah, in simpler terms, this isn't a retrospective of the game or anything. Today, I'll talk about things that feel unfinished and ideas to expand on them, flawed concepts and how to fix them. So yeah, let's just begin. So I would like to begin with the insight mechanic. It represents the desire of man for knowledge, but also its inability to comprehend the occult truth of Yharnam. Bloodborne implemented its eldritch horror elements into a gameplay mechanic. That sounds awesome. But now, what does it do and how do you get it? You get insight by witnessing disturbing entities and locations. And what it does is it allows you to witness and hear things among some other stuff. And it makes sense. The more you get exposed to the truth, the more you're susceptible to its influence, for the better or for the worst. But now, what does it actually do? What does it really do? At one insight, the doll wakes up. The messengers give you the beckoning bell and silencing blink, but at 0 insight, no mad ones would appear during the Witch of Hamwick boss fight, and that is really cool. Changing a boss fight based on your insight seems like a great idea, but it's not really that useful because the Witch of Hamwick is already the easiest boss in the game, and the Witch of Hamwick is the only boss fight that gets affected by insight. This is so unfortunate. Why is she the only one with an insight treatment? So many bosses could have greatly benefited from insight affecting them, so kind of a waste. But anyways, with 15 insight, the church doctors have their lamps covered with eyes. They also gain the ability to shoot arcane projectiles, and the scythe variants get arcane buffs on their weapon. That's nice. One of the drawbacks from insight is that some enemies get buffs. You see things that they truly are, and therefore experience them as such. And also, some mad ones will spawn earlier in Hamwick. But again, those church doctors and mad ones are the only enemies that get affected by insight. There's so much potential here. It could have been like the tendency mechanic from Demon Souls, but actually manageable because insight is pretty easy to gain and get rid of. Imagine only being able to see NPCs with insight, or on the contrary, only being able to talk to NPCs without insight, like the suspicious beggar. Imagine having too much insight, only seeing him as a vulgar beast and not a human form for an instant, seeing him directly as an abhorrent beast. And if the concept of more enemies appearing based on your insight has been implanted throughout the whole game, it could have been like the Black World tendency, or being grave-lorded to have insight, seeing way more horrors that you can actually fight, an actual tangible drawback to having insight. Because right now, having insight doesn't really matter, and having such a core concept and mechanic matter so little is kind of a shame. But coming back on what it does to have insight, with 15 insight, you can see Gehrman talking in his sleep in the Garden of the Dream, and that's great. Making you able to see more of a mysterious character like Gehrman with insight feels appropriate and rewarding if you're interested in the lore. And I really like the insight being, you can see the world how it truly is, but at your own risk. It really fits with the Lovecraftian themes of Bloodborne. But again, he's the only NPC affected by insight. A shame. And with what we have right now, it sadly feels like they didn't have time to flesh out insight, and implement it all throughout the game. But anyways, with 30 insight, you can hear winter lanterns singing in the distance. At 50 insight, the music in the Hunter's Dream changes. Subtle but efficient change. And at 60 insight, you can randomly hear Murgo crying in the distance in any area. I think those three are amazing. It's one of those horror elements that really add a whole lot to the atmosphere of the game, and I wished there were more changes like those with Insight. Seeing the unknown is the thing, but what about hearing it? Makes you feel like you're being watched and that at any corner you might see something you weren't meant to see. And finally, with 40 Insight, you can see amygdalas around the cathedral ward. And I think invisible amygdalas grabbing you, and later on seeing them with enough insight is genius. It's just such a memorable experience. It was here all along. Watching, it perfectly foreshadows the hidden truth of Yharnam by literally hiding it in plain sight. And being able to see them before the blood moon with enough insight is great as well. Being dedicated enough to find out the secret of Yharnam early on can make you and you alone see them before anyone else due to your thirst for knowledge. And this is already amazing, but just a little more would have been appreciated. Maybe not more amygdalas to not normalize them too much and keep the big reveal in stock for Yahagul, but maybe put more subtle things appearing, mysterious corpses, shadows or blood puddles with no body would have been great at making everything, even if just slightly, different with enough insight, because with 40 insight all you see is 2 amygdalas. And don't get me wrong, this is already really threatening, but not enough for my taste. And we won't talk about 50 and 60 insight because I already mentioned them before in the hearing part of insight. But nothing for 99 insight. Huh. Well, that's kind of a shame. Would have been neat to maybe transform into a Lumenwood or show some cosmic traits on your body, your animations changing without even having the Milkwood rune or anything at all would have been nice, to be honest. With 99 insight partially starting to ascend, or have some eyes grow on you and your body would have been appropriate. Actual consequences or advantages or just a visual thing would have been appreciated. And now, that's about it for the insight. They could have made so much more. Little things such as with enough insight getting a visual indication of, for example, grab attacks, just like Sekiro, I think would have been really neat. Actual combat advantages from having insight, because other than making you insane, seeing the world it truly is doesn't do anything at the moment. And I think perceiving the world it truly is, literally having more eyes, should allow you to vaguely predict, foresee and observe the enemy and its attacks. Just make that with 30 or 40 insight, an eye appears above an enemy's strongest attack or grabs with a little sound effect. But there is much more to do, and the shadow thing was present in the network tests. At one point of the map you could see the shadow of an amygdala. It did have a body, but let's say it was invisible. What an insane thing to see. But maybe just don't put it in the very first area of the game. But many other things could be affected by insight. Bosses and NPCs, as I already talked about, being able to search for the Eldritch truth and see the world it truly is, or hide your eyes and ignore it, literally. It would have been amazing to have, for example, a headpiece to hide your eyes just like the statues in Cathedral Road to not gain insight anymore, which would allow you to, for example, take, I don't know, different routes, simply killing beasts, not sinking Bergenworth, hiding from the truth. I know it seems like I'm asking for a whole new game here, but I think it would have been great to have 2 different routes to take almost. On the side of Woodlam, gaining insight, eyes on the inside, and seeking to ascend to higher planes of thought, or take the side of Lawrence and rely on the forbidden sacred blood, kind of like in Dark Souls 1. Even if it is a little underdeveloped, you could really early be a Dark Wraith on the path to being a Dark Lord of Men, or follow the prophecy on Listen to the Gods on the path to licking the flame. Because in Bloodborne, the ending you chose to take only affects the end of the game, with no different rewards or NPCs being really affected. You just make your mind on what to do at the very end of the game, without really being able to change the end from the very beginning, to choose the path. And lastly, for the inside part, Frenzy. Just taking some damage after being directly seen or mangled by eldritch creatures is good, and it building up faster based on your insight is a nice touch, but I don't think it represents that peculiar Yharnam madness that well. I mean, don't get me wrong, Winter Lanterns are a good representation, but I think getting stunned or being unable to attack out of fear, giving them a timed window to disfigure us, would have made them even more threatening. But at the same time, Not being able to attack would have taken away from the hunter being a freaking badass. So yeah, not sure about that one, but being stunned seems completely reasonable, as well as taking less damage, and I think it would have made for a much more balanced, but also much more in line with what it means to be frenzied. Maybe also get the effect of frenzy on certain weapons to use in PvP, or even make certain enemies get affected by frenzy as well. But now, we have insight for the cosmic elements, but what about Beasthood? It's just even more underdeveloped. With a certain item, or rune, you can have a Beasthood meter. This Beasthood meter's length will be determined by your Beasthood stat, and your Beasthood stat is higher the least insight you have. And what the Beasthood meter does is, the more you attack, the more it fills, and the more it fills, the more damage you deal, but it passively decreases when you're not attacking. But it also makes you take more damage the more filled your Beasthood meter is. Think of it as a glass cannon mechanic, but it's pretty busted. The proof is I never knew until recently that it made you take more damage. That's how much of a glass you become, and that's just it. It's a cool feature, but it feels like a small part of a much greater mechanic. I mean, beasts are a central part of Bloodborne, but its interactions with the player is so underwhelming, even with how you could argue that the influence of the moon presence makes you not able to transform into a beast or go further in a beasthood than what you currently have. So other than beast pellets, we have the Beast Embrace rune. It gives you a permanent beasthood meter, which is nice, and it alters your appearance to one of a beast. But we have nothing other than that, and just being able to suddenly be beast or Luminoid with the Milkwood rune feels too free, too easy. Like just be alien or beast in the blink of an eye. It doesn't seem really earned. Why not naturally start the transformation and just be able to finalize it, embrace it with the runes? I think that would be a little better. But I think the thing Beasthood needs is right next to Insight, have Beasthood. The more blood you spill, the more of a beast you become. Not being able to wield certain weapons, doing more damage with your fists. After all, you've been going claws lately. More and more hair growing on your body, your pupil has collapsed and turned into mush. Your idle attack and dodging animations shifting to something more erratic. Like, it's crazy to me that this game about people transforming into beasts and scholars getting granted eyes on the inside doesn't affect the player in any meaningful way upon having beasthood or eyes. But you could do more, even cooler things. New NPCs showing them trying to hunt you and previously encountered NPCs refusing to speak to you, and forcing a conversation will make them hostile, playing as a blood-crazed hunter on the brink of losing control. Though, how to make beasthood go up is a little tricky to figure out. Would it be caused by killing human NPCs and the lack of insight? I think yes. But it would be pretty tricky to implement anyways, and yes, I know making insight and beasthood interact with each other would be more convoluted than Dark Souls 3 lore, but just imagine how cool it would be to have to manage those two, not have too many eyes on the inside or to the point of insanity, but not be so oblivious and blood-crazed to the point of turning into a beast. That sounds insanely cool. Now that we're finally done with insight and beasthood, the moon phases. The game starts in the evening. For now, nothing too disturbing happens except for the beasts, but there is still a lot of great foreshadowing, some descriptions of, for example, the madman's knowledge, or a previously mentioned amygdala's grabbing you. Overall, I think this phase is already good enough. Then it's a night phase after Vicar Amelia. He changes the skybox and lighting of the world, as well as making patches replace some nameless NPCs. Some church giants will be asleep unless aggroed, and a few enemies will have disappeared. But that's really about it. A bit disappointing. I feel like more stuff could happen. After all, the hunt has now truly started. Maybe adding more beasts, making some previously encountered enemies further transformed, and add some mini-bosses to previously visited areas could be cool. I really like the idea of being able to re-explore previous areas after time passes. It would make the world feel more alive, like you're not the only one evolving here. And since the hunt has now actually begun, maybe having some hunters NPCs in action fighting beasts. Maybe not make whole new NPCs, but just seeing a few hunters fighting beasts around Yana with a few lines of dialogue would have been great. And I believe Gascoigne was supposed to be found fighting beasts in central Yanam. and I think it could have been greatly implemented. The Gascoigne fight already has impact and is amazing, but imagine it after meeting him beforehand as a fellow hunter and sane, hearing him talk about his daughter and the hunt. But of course, putting too much hunters around would make the game easier, less stressful, and overall would hurt the atmosphere. So yeah, careful with that change. I believe it can work, but it can also be a disaster. And finally, for the Blood Moon. We had the start of the hunt, a deep night filled with beasts, and now the Great Ones descend and bless a womb with a child. This phase is perfectly introduced. The lore notes all throughout Yharnam, the Moonside Lake, the truth revealed, the Red Moon hangs low. Now, what does it do? Amygdalas. You don't need to have 40 insight to see them anymore. Obviously, NPCs can no longer be saved. That's good. You can tell it's too late just by taking a look outside. Ariana and Adela can no longer provide blood. Makes sense with Ariana bearing the celestial lava and Adela losing her mind. Isefka has also gotten her womb blessed and is now frantically having spasms. Aileen has almost been killed by one of his targets, or lost her mind. Gilbert has succumbed to the scourge of the beasts, and overall almost everyone in Yharnam has been affected by the Red Moon, becoming a beast, being forcefully inseminated by forces beyond your comprehension, or simply losing your mind, or almost getting slaughtered. The Red Moon shows no mercy. But now, apart from that, the previous areas have not changed. The townfolk haven't changed since the evening. The beasts are still the same. And I think that's really unfortunate. Almost nothing has changed except for the NPCs. It feels way too similar. Like the Red Moon isn't even really a big deal, you know? Like, that's bad. I'm supposed to feel terrified at all times with the Red Moon above me. But the world hasn't changed. And I'm not the only one that thinks Bloodborne would have benefited from changing its areas, at least in the Blood Moon phase. Without spoiling it, just look at Bloodborne PSX. It would have been so great to, after the more or less safe evening, have the beastly deep night, and now madness-inducing creatures roaming the Red Moon-lit streets. It would have been amazing to see Garden of Eyes and all kinds of celestial beings in central Yharnam killing beasts in real time. Not being the only hunter of beasts out tonight would have been so great. And I think to not just copy and paste enemies for the Blood Moon, add new items or even weapons to encourage revisiting the areas for more than just enemies you already fought. Maybe even open sealed before passages, and of course, new enemies. New amygdalas all throughout more of the world, and actually having amygdalas like move, like crawl on walls in the distance would be amazing. Having the fear in the back of your head that one could just come out of nowhere is terrifying. Way more corpses around. Being able to explore some of the buildings that had nameless NPCs inside of them. And that was just for central Yharnam. But imagine all the things that could have been in the other areas. And I think you can change even more. By making the levels more interconnected, you could open certain areas early and experience them differently. As an example, the Forbidden Woods could have no celestial emissaries and fewer serpents. After all, they're creatures of the night. But at that point, making the world more interconnected would require to close certain areas to not be able to just rush through the game in the first moon phase. It would have to be done in a way that doesn't, I guess, break the progression of the story, because moon phases are extremely important to the narrative. Like, you hear about Bergenworth all throughout, and being able to just get there earlier would kind of ruin the moment. But it would also be needed to change the way to make time pass. So yeah, really complicated change, but I believe it can be done in a way that makes the moon phases an even more than Nori is truly amazing mechanic. And talking about locations, why not throw a few more gimmicks in there? Areas feel too straightforward. Now for the RPG elements. So this one is a bit more vague than the other points so far, but let me explain. I feel like this game tries to be more like Dark Souls, more RPG than action, but it wants to be more like Sekiro, more action than RPG. Let me explain. The combat is excellent, and it's one of the main focuses of Bloodborne. Bloodborne has a really small amount of weapons compared to the other games. It's also the Souls games with the least stats, and the gameplay doesn't really rely on them compared to the other games. It relies on the trick weapons you're using. The stats are also quite weird. They cap really early, except for Endurance, which caps at 40, and Arcane, which doesn't hard cap. All the stats soft cap at 25, and hard cap at 50. At that point, why investing into stats if they're not doing anything anymore? It feels like the game doesn't want you to invest in stats, so the question I'm asking is, why? There is no weight management, no respec. Those little things that would fit in an RPG game are just not present. It feels like Bloodborne wants to be an action game more than an RPG, are just not present. It feels like Bloodborne wants to be an action game more than an RPG, but is stuck within what Dark Souls set as the basis for Souls games. Sekiro broke free of those shackles in 2019, but Bloodborne didn't, which really handicaps it. And the stats themselves are really weird, like 100 tools still scale of Arcane all the way until 99, but there is really small variety of hidden 100 tools, which is unfortunate. But more than that, the damage you can do at an Arcane is worse than a BL4 character, a Beast Pellet, a Bolt Paper, and a Saw Cleaver. So this is just to say that it's terribly imbalanced. No Arcane build can even comprehend a fraction of the power of physical builds. And Bloodborne could have been an RPG if it wanted to, but it seems like they did the bare minimum to be considered an RPG, to be considered Souls-like, and to still be like Dark Souls. Like, for example, if we consider Blood Tinge as a caster stat and silver bullets as an FP bar, where is Might? Where's the stat to raise the amount of silver bullets? The only way to get silver bullets is a rune, and there are much better runes out there, and you can just use blood bullets in one blood vial to heal you afterwards, to instantly get 5 bullets. So where's the point in wasting a rune slot? And I think Bloodborne would have benefited, maybe not from a whole stat dedicated to getting more bullets, but making Blood Tinge give you more bullets as you invest points into it. But the system itself of casting in this game, every gun and hunter tool related, is imbalanced and severely underdeveloped. Yeah, I'm saying this word a lot today. And those are not the only stats with problems. Skill doesn't tell you that it makes visceral damage higher, and the damage of viscerals itself can quickly get obscene, and I think making parries and viscerals a more central part of the gameplay while lowering the damage could be better than the spam gun to stagger and parry enemies and one-shot them. And on the subject of telling you what they're about, Beasthood.
Meanwhile, Beasthood uses itself in its own description to describe itself. The higher this attribute, the closer you are to Beasthood when temporarily transformed. Huh? You still haven't told me what Beasthood is about, game?
But other RPG elements are useless or broken, like damage types. The only thing they do, other than glowing a different color, is most of the time beasts are sensible to fire, most of the time kins are sensible to bolt. Like, bolt doesn't have a single interaction with water. This is baffling to me. Like, in every Souls game, you at least get a little arc of lightning on the water, you know, but nothing in Bloodborne. Why? Arcane does nothing. It's just the magic damage of Bloodborne, but all the enemies have a really high resistance to it, so what's the point? And dealing blood damage to dogs makes them inexplicably fly off 20 feet in the air. Why? What even is the point? There's just little to no unique interactions with anything to speak of. All of those damage types are a trick. They don't matter at all. Same thing for status effects. Frenzy can only be inflicted upon you, and other than just making this one enemy one-shot you, it doesn't do anything. What a waste. Beasthood is completely broken. You can deal an absurd amount of damage with little to no drawbacks. Poison serves no purpose other than cheesing, and the game acknowledges this. And okay, it's funny, just like shields. But it really feels like they were forced to put it into the game because it's an RPG, you know, but... Oh wait, no, it's because Miyazaki wanted a poison swamp again, that's right. Rapid Poison is so confusing. Why is it called Rapid Poison? Just call it Blood Loss. It has the exact same effect as Blood Loss in the other games. And both Rapid and Slow Poison are both almost non-existent. I never get Rapid Poisoned, I never get poisoned, except in 2 areas, and I, the player, cannot inflict Rapid or Slow Poison. Only the Chikage has a built-in Rapid Poison, but your target will probably be dead before you can trigger it. and you can almost only get poison gems in challenge dungeons. So yeah, hope you like farming. Guess you like 1 or 2 poison per gem, like, why? This feels so rough, it's insane. Poison isn't even good. Why make me have to go through so much for the shittiest build you have to offer, game? And I can just use poison knives. Like, this feels so unfinished. Then there's oil. Like, 3 enemies in the entire game throw oil at you near a source of fire. Meh. It really isn't useful for you as well, because it's only 1 hit that gets buffed per oil urn, and all the fire damage you get is from molotovs or fire paper, so it breaks the rhythm of the fight for, okay, damage times 2, but molotovs quickly fall off in damage even with oil urns anyways. And even with fire paper, most of your damage will be physical, so don't even bother. You're better off hitting the enemy twice than throwing an oil urn. It's also pretty hard to land, and the cherry on top, why doesn't it put people on fire? Why is it just double fire damage? Like come on, it's oil! Give me more than that. Even Sekiro has it. It stuns enemies for a second and continues to do damage for a bit. Is that too much to ask? There's also a really limited amount of upgrade materials. You have to either farm or go into New Game Plus to maximize the potential of all those cool weapons. True weapons are the main thing of Bloodborne's combat, and you can't even experiment with them. Why not just not make them upgradable at that point? Just like Wolf's Kusabimaru. Make all the weapons scale with something common and not upgrades. But if you still want to make this kind of RPG, just put more upgrade materials around. And for the people saying to just test the weapons you get in the first area and upgrade them based on if it fits your playstyle, I say that doesn't work, because to make my way and get the cool weapons, I have to go through the entire freaking game. So I have to upgrade something that's really basic and boring compared to the super cool weapons the mid and in-game DLC has to offer, and this makes that I can't upgrade cool weapons when I get them, even if I wanted to, without tedious amounts of farming. And one last thing about the RPG aspect, blood gems. But I'm gonna keep it short. Horrible farming required, totally imbalanced, breaks the game more than anything, but doesn't affect first playthroughs that much, all OP blood gems are deep in the chalice dungeons. Too many blood gems that nobody uses, everyone uses the same tempering blood gem that just gets your damage up. Don't tell me to use other blood gems, tell FromSoft to implement more interesting blood gems in their game. So yeah, everyone uses tempering, except for blood tinge builds with 1 or 2 gun gems and one-shot builds with bowlmans. Everyone uses tempering, and rightfully so, it's just the best in general. But I mean, that's not counting the abyssals, which will drive you insane. I wish for more variety in their effects, and them to be balanced, although they're implemented in a weird way. A few are in the world as fixed drops, and by a few I mean a few. Only 3 gems in the whole base game are for arcane builds, and guess what? They're all different damage types, so I can't even use them on a single weapon. And the game doesn't really put an emphasis on blood gems in the first place, but it should. It's one of the main damage sources you'll be getting, so just putting the system on the side and waiting for new players to figure it out until they're fighting Ludwig with the 3 blood gems they got in the Cathedral Ward is nonsense. To understand and correctly use blood gems, you need a YouTube guide. It's, I think, one of the least instinctive mechanics in the Soul series. Damage types that mean nothing, broken stats, the whole thing about upgrading weapons, blood gems. Why is this an RPG? I think the game has a lot of potential as an RPG and as an action game, but it needs to choose, because right now it's trying to do both at the same time, and it's not working out.
もともとアクションゲームが好きな方であったりとか、アクション RPG が好きな方では絶対
Sekiro is an action game through and through. All you have to manage is your health, attack power, skill tree, and your prosthetic arm, and I think Bloodborne would have been a much better game by simply focusing even more on combat mechanics, perfecting them, and then having light RPG elements like Sekiro, because it's way too convoluted for its own good right now. Natural scaling along the game by beating main or side bosses, and being able to focus on the mysteries, lore, and combat seems like a better option than struggling with meaningless side effects, weird stats, and blood gem farming, don't you think? Like, the trick weapons of Bloodborne are insanely cool, but most players just get their axe, cane or cleaver at the beginning and do the whole game with it. That is so sad, what a waste, all those greatly designed weapons never to be used. Like, imagine if you didn't have to upgrade anything to be able to do damage. Imagine if you didn't have to have certain stats to wield them, because the old blood gives you supernatural physical abilities. You can dash like that and take that much damage without dying, but you can't wield this hammer? Like, how can you not be able to wield a hammer? Bloodborne needs to stop pretending to be Dark Souls and needs to start being Sekiro. But now that I'm done ranting about the RPG stuff, let's talk about cut content. Just like every Souls game, there's a lot of it. So, first we're going to talk about one of the biggest disappointments in the whole game. The final boss. No, not Goman, he's cool. Though, I'm gonna slip a lot of criticism in there, he's just too fast. I don't know, it's not really a skill issue, but his movement is weird. I don't know, anyways. Moon Presence. I love everything about Flora. Their design is amazing and has some pretty cool lore implications. Their introduction cutscene is one of my favorite in video game history, right next to Ludwig's second phase. It's just such an indescribable moment. But anyways, the boss itself is the worst thing about itself, about the Moon Presence. It's like a worst blood-stabbed beast. Its projectiles are super easy to dodge, and most of the time they're not even in your way, and the gimmick of getting your health down to 1 HP has potential, but it's just super easy to counter. So overall, this boss is just a huge disappointment. And there's a reason. There is 2 cut phases for this boss. So of course, there's the one you probably know, the third phase that was supposed to appear in the cut muddy lake of the Chalice dungeons, as the true body of the Moon Presence. Because, yeah, I think the Moon Presence within the dream is the consciousness of the Moon Presence, but not its true body. Think of it like King Gallant and King Gallant. So yeah, we got the gliding, mangled Moon Presence. Really cool. Wish it would have been worked on a little more and implemented. But there's also a Moon Presence that I think was supposed to be a second phase, where the Moon Presence we fight in the dream. And I don't think a lot of people even know about it. It's very unfinished, and has this sort of cos-ish thing on its main body. This doesn't really look like anything else in game except for the cos parasite. But anyhow, the Moon Presence, even if it was meant to have this Moon Presence as second phase or not, is sadly unfinished. Quite tragic when its design and intro cutscene are just so amazing and otherworldly. But anyways, let's move on. So, you know how I previously mentioned changing the areas depending on the moon phase? Well, there is cut content about such a thing, and I'm just devastated that it did make it to the final product. And it's not just one area that was supposed to change. There was a snake ball boss once that was supposed to be the boss of the forest instead of Shadows of Yharnam, but later in development it was supposed to appear in the muddy lake of the forest for the Blood Moon. And kind of unfortunate it was cut. I mean, sure, it wouldn't have really been an amazing boss, and it would, I think, have required a little more tweaking, because what we've restored right now isn't really incredible. But I think it would have been nice to see the Source of the Serpents get out of the ground for the Blood Moon, or just make it an optional boss of the forest, and something neat would have been to make the Shadows of Yharnam unable to summon snakes after you kill the snake ball. But this would also require making the snakes in the Shadows of Yharnam fight more important, because right now it's pretty rare attack already. But there's just a lot more. The Blood Minister and Lady Maria were NPCs instead of a one-time cutscene and boss. There's also, as I already mentioned, a Gascoigne encounter before the fight, and a lot more NPCs that didn't make it to the final game. There's, for example, this Slug Princess, which I love the design of. Master Willem was also a boss at one point, but I think I prefer what we have right now. Just seeing this important figure in the world of Bloodborne just not even being able to move or talk, just pointing at the lake, is a really unsettling moment, and it truly has this aura of mystery. What would he say to us if he could talk? And killing him in a boss fight would be a bit weird, to be honest. Like, why would he fight us? Calm down, old man. But there's a lot of cut enemies and bosses other than Willem. There's some weird dolls that look like they're from Sekiro, skeletons, gargoyles and knights that probably belong to the Chalice dungeons. There also was a boss rush thing in the Chalice dungeons. Pretty sad that this one didn't make it in, with it being a really simple feature. And of course, lots of cut stuff from the alpha that I won't get into. And lastly, I'd like to talk about all kinds of stuff that I think need to be tweaked, that didn't really fit with anything else. Limb breaking. Limb breaking is a pretty cool mechanic. by focusing your hits on a certain body part, you could break that limb. It will do a burst of damage as well as stun the boss for a bit. Every subsequent attack to the limb will do more damage, and most bosses with breakable limbs have a move to heal all said limbs, to be broken again. But bosses also get affected by limbs being broken. Some moves and animations of the boss will be different. Now that's really cool. It truly fits with Bloodborne's treatment of beasts and kins. But here comes the balance issue. Let's compare limb breaking with stance breaking in Elden Ring. So stance breaking in Elden Ring only depends on the weapon and the move you're using, so it doesn't matter how upgraded the weapon is, you'll still stance break the same. But Bloodborne's limb breaking is based solely on damage, so you can just go against any boss with your gem-dot sword cleaver and just stun lock them to death by breaking every bone in their body. And a simple fix would have simply been to not base it on damage dealt, but the amount of times you hit that limb. And to continue with talking about what could have been, just more interactions depending on which limb you broke would have been pretty nice, because honestly, I haven't noticed a lot of them. So, something else that needs some changes. Boss rewards. They're often pretty underwhelming, and it's often the blood echoes and being able to continue playing that's the reward, which is unfortunate. For example, the Witches of Hemwick and the One Reborn drop random chalice dungeon materials. Like, how do main bosses and really important bosses drop materials for something as optional as chalice dungeons? I'm okay with Bloodborne introducing players to chalice dungeons by giving them items to remind them of chalice dungeons and that they should go there at one point, but there's just too many boss rewards that are just chalice dungeon things. Bloodstaff's Beast, Amygdala, Abritas, they all give chalices, and yeah, I mean, you have to get them somehow, but still, lots of people don't engage with them, so just give me something else that would be useful to everyone. But there's not only the chalices boss rewards that I find lacking. Rom drops a cold blood. Imagine if, I don't know, Yorm dropped the soul of a champion. Like, Rom gives nothing, she just gives you blood echoes, and yes, she also rewards you with the rest of the game. But I want to be rewarded from beating Rom with something else than just more bosses that are giving me more chalice dungeon materials. I want to get something from Rom herself. And Vicar Amelia drops her pendant, something personalized. Good. But actually no, you would think it would be significant, but it's not. It serves no use except from being broken into a mediocre blood gem. It's not like the red jeweled brooch where you can use it for a questline instead of getting a blood gem out of it. I think something nice would have been to be able to interact with, for example, Adela only if you had the pendant. I mean, that's just an example, but I mean, come on, I'm not asking for much here. I could ask about getting boss souls and weapons. The Moon Presence gives you nothing. What the hell? The Witness, or should I say Murgo, drops you a third code of an umbilical cord, which I would complain about, but it makes sense, and I don't know, Murgo's Witness doesn't feel like she deserves getting, a reward anyway. But really, it just feels appropriate. Can't really pinpoint why, though. A weird case is also Mikolash and Martyr Garius, and honestly, the Mintis cage for Mikolash feels perfect. Though, why not give this cage a little effect, hey? Or like to other armor. That's something I've noticed, there is no effects for any set in the game or even piece. And resistances in this game already don't really matter. So I would have liked to see more use for armor than fashion souls. But anyways, so Martial Garius gives you his crown. Okay. And gives you access to Annalise. And honestly, I have absolutely no opinions or feeling about this, so yeah, do of that what you will. And bosses that give you runes are more reasonable than the other things, but even then, I don't know, it doesn't feel like enough for defeating a boss. And I think the best rewards you get are badges and weapons, because I mean, trick weapons are the best thing you can get after all. Badges, as long as they just don't give you weapons you can find in the area, are just a bunch of stuff, so I accept it. And often, of course, directly giving a weapon feels like the most appropriate reward. The only thing the useless rewards I previously mentioned have is maybe low relevance, but cause Parasite is my favorite weapon, sorry pizza cutter, but it also has low relevance, and the lamest boss rewards are probably just keys and things to continue, like, give it to me, but also give me something related to the boss. I mean, sure, you get Gascoigne's and Lady Maria's armor after killing them, you don't only get the Odin Tomb key and Celestial Dial, but while Fashionborn is cool and all, having it be your only reward is just a bit lame. Now for the multiplayer. So, it's just the worst in the whole Soul series. First, let's start with how to even, well, engage with it. The matchmaking of Bloodborne is just terrible. It really is. It seems like the game doesn't want you to co-op. Like, normally you have signs that people can use. They're visible and you know who you're inviting into your world. But in Bloodborne, you activate a bell item that will only invite players who stand in a really vague vicinity around you. You can just not be matchmaked with someone just because you're a few meters apart. Like, are they trying to be as inefficient and convenient as possible? And yeah, you can't see who you're being matchmaked with. With signs, you could read their name and see their equipment. Simple but useful feature. But now, you're just welcoming anybody with open arms. Like, imagine in Dark Souls 3, you see someone with a murky summonable as a duelist, so you don't summon them. But in Bloodborne, you can't prevent someone, co-op or duelist, from co-oping or invading you. And duelists isn't the right word, because you can't really duel in this game. You can only get invaded. Why? Just let me choose who I want to co-op with, and if there were duels, who I want to duel with. Just give me a pop-up, just like how you can use a silencer. Just give me a pop-up that shows me my cooperator or duelist. Simple changes, big differences. And coming back on the restrictiveness of co-op, may I remind you that Elden Ring has a feature which allows you to search for co-op or invasions in the entire freaking map. Like, one of the points of the bell was not to be forced to search for signs, and it would have worked, if only the area where you can actually be matchmaked with people was bigger, because right now, how do you co-op against Ludwig? Where do you stand? Right in front of the fog gate? At the beginning of the hallway that goes to the fog gate? At the lamp? I have no fucking clue. And while you could argue that the same thing happened in Dark Souls, a quick look allowed me to know if I could co-op or not. In Bloodborne, I have to randomly wait at each spot, moving around a little to not miss anyone. But doing that could make me miss more people at the same time. It's just so much less efficient at matchmaking people. Like, one thing that could have made this bell system work is, you know, how white phantoms sometimes appear showing you other players near you. Well, just make those phantoms blue if they're searching for co-op, and make them appear more often than white phantoms. You could also do this for invaders and duelists, but the game could have simply used signs. The game has signs. The signs of the NPCs. You could have just gave me the option to choose sign or bell to co-op. Like, experiment with your weird bell system, but let me co-op with your much more efficient and straightforward signs. And yeah, I know the main feature of bells is to matchmake with others while on the fly, and while that sounds like a good idea, to just all throughout the game have passive invasions and co-op, how can you make it work if you make it so restrictive? And the way to invade is odd. Like, in 2 areas of the game, there are bell-ringing women. Kill them and no invasion, but bell-ringing women spawn when you co-op. But bell-ringing women don't respawn where you don't co-op. So how am I supposed to invade people that can't co-op because they killed the boss or killed the bell-ringing woman? I just can't. Make them respawn. But I don't really know that much about Bloodborne invasion, so that might be just false. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. And if that was the only problem, when you hit someone in Bloodborne PvP, the hit registers like 3 times slower in Bloodborne than they do in other games. It just feels janky. But there's also balance issues. I mean, spamming guns for cheap damage and parries is the easiest and most efficient thing you can do to win duels. But honestly, I won't get too deep into the balance of the PvP itself. I've tried it quite a few times, but I don't feel like I can give a deep enough explanation without pretending I know more than I actually know. But all I'm sure of is that it's unbalanced. I mean, I don't think there's even blood gem matchmaking, so you could theoretically show up in low-level areas with your abyssal gems and just two-shot everyone. And blood gems are one of the main sources of damage in this game, and the difference between a low-level gem and the best gems is gigantic. Like, imagine the twinking in this game if it was possible to get matchmaked with other people. And I won't get into the covenants too much, but the factions in Bloodborne are so cool, but their rune are terrible. Their multiplayer effects are non-existent or terrible. Like, look at those covenant rewards. It's emotes. What the hell? Give me something for playing your game, oh my god! And there's basically little to no quest lines related to covenants. But there's also a lack of them. There are a lot of factions in this game, lots of group of hunters, but you can only be in like 4 of them. It's just such a waste. They had their hands on something unique there. If only they just pushed a little further, they could have made a truly unique multiplayer experience for this game. And right now, it's one of the biggest things it's lacking. A good multiplayer. But talking about runes, the Caryll Runes, they're supposed to replace rings, and I think they do a pretty bad job. First of all, lots of them are only in chalice dungeons. You know this very optional and experimental weird place that you definitely don't want yourself to get lost into for your own sanity? Second of all, there's just a really small amount of them. And third of all, the effects themselves are kind of boring and super basic, and it could really use some more unique effects, because right now, the Caryll Runes you have are more HP, more endurance, stamina recovery speed, more resistance over a certain type of damage, more Beasthood meter, get more moves for the Beast Claws, get more moves for the Cost Parasite and more Arcane Discovery, make Viscerals even more OP, Poison, Frenzy Resistance, more Vials, more bullets, heal like 1 HP per second when under 20% HP. This is fucking terrible. Rally potential, but for some reason only the first 2, because fuck rally builds I guess. More Blood Echoes from Viscerals, way too specific. But hey, at least we get 500 million Blood Echoes. Increase max health while in co-op. More Blood Echoes, grants bullets from Viscerals, pretty cool, I like it. Blood Vials heals 2% more HP. And as you can see, lots of them are lame and severely underpowered. And all of this makes that I always use the same gens, more HP and endurance, and then either more rally potential or bullets depending on if I'm a caster or strictly melee. And so many runes have the potential of being awesome, like the Covenant runes are all terrible. Like come on, at least make the effect stronger. 2% more blood vial healing? 2%? This lack of variety and viability of runes really hurts Bloodborne. Like, coming back to the being more like Sekiro point, even if Sekiro didn't offer you as much options as the other Souls games, it still had variety in what it did offer, and the game's variety came from the creativity of the player, and you could play in a lot of ways even with this at first, seemingly super restrictive combat. But it seems like the only part of the combat and build creation of Bloodborne that got the attention it needed to be perfect were trick weapons. Everything else got left behind. That's just unfortunate. Lots of things are not viable because of blood gems and Caryll Runes, like poison builds. Rally builds are really hard to set up and your damage gets trashed. Arcane builds, well, as I already said, never get close to the damage of a melee build. Tanky regeneration builds died in the womb. I mean, look at your options. It seems like everything slightly different from just a melee trick weapons with HP and endurance rune is just not viable. That's just sad. And all of this makes that Bloodborne's replayability rely solely on trick weapons, because almost nothing else can be played around with creatively or interestingly. So, doesn't this mean that Bloodborne might be the game with the least variety in its builds? All it has is its trick weapons. They're amazing, I love them, but that's everything you can make. Everything that's viable. Everything else you can make if you farm hard enough, but wouldn't be worth the trouble. What's worth it in this game is farming Tempering Blood Gems for an hour, get a Beast Pellet, a Bolt Paper, and a Saw Cleaver. And I'm trying, people. I am trying to play the game differently, but I can't play with anything else that isn't a melee trick weapon because the other options are just not fun. And they would be fun if they were viable and if I didn't have to farm my social life out to get them. I'm now trying to start farming for poison and rally gems, but I got discouraged. It just wouldn't drop, and I knew it wouldn't be worth it. But of course I still played the game a lot just for its trick weapons. But there's so much more just out of reach. So much more options, so much more build variety. And one last little thing. Lamps, just overall them please. Make them like bonfires. Stop forcing me to warp back to the dream for the smallest things. Don't force me to wait 8 seconds every time. Please, just let me rest at the lamp. Give me an option to stock things and warp at other lamps. Thanks. And now, I am not talking about the Chalice dungeons, because else this video would be 10 hours long. All you need to know is that I found them really unrefined with how much potential they had. So, now for the conclusion. Bloodborne is unfinished, but to talk about what we discussed, Insight and Beasthood are too unconsequential. Their lack of importance while being two central themes to Bloodborne is unfortunate. The moon phases don't have enough differences between them. Barely anything changes or evolves except for the skybox and a few NPC questlines. The RPG elements of Bloodborne do nothing but holding back its full potential. The game could work as an RPG and an action game with light RPG elements, but FromSoft, bound by the RPG part of Dark Souls or by the desire to please everybody, ended up pleasing no one. The Blood Gems and Chalice Dungeons are two very experimental parts of the game, and while they have some potential, the Chalice Dungeons become more and more tedious the more you try to interact with them, and the Blood Gems need a serious overhaul or minimum rebalance. Bloodborne is one of the Souls games with the most cut content and suffers a lot from it, and it's quite infuriating that the true and complete Bloodborne was taken away from us by time and budget constraints. Some mechanics and parts of the game need to change, limb breaking because it literally breaks the game more than the limbs of the bosses, and boss rewards because they don't feel rewarding. The multiplayer needs to change its matchmaking, be less restrictive. They also need to fix their netcode, as well as just a general rebalancing. Covenants need to change. Everything they did in this game is flawed, or more than obviously incomplete. Runes need more variety, and the game in general needs to make certain builds options more viable and more accessible, because a lot of not even good builds are only accessible through Chalice Dungeons, and trust me, it's not the good part of them. And lastly, just modify lamps to be just like bonfires. But anyways, this video was made to express this thing I felt recently, and I couldn't just not make a video about it. Bloodborne the game really did to my heart, my favorite thing of all time right beside Berserk, and honestly it could have been so much greater, and I started making this video after I realized how much insight didn't really matter, and more I just couldn't stop writing about everything that I'm now seeing. This reminded me that Bloodborne and every Souls game is deeply flawed in its own right, and that even while those games are perhaps the best I've ever played, perfection in video games is still far from achieved. And in one way it's reassuring. We can make even better games than Bloodborne. That's quite baffling to me right now. But coming back to Bloodborne and how it could have been much greater, it's quite frustrating that it's been put on a leash by RPG elements, time constraints, budget, and simply creative and design mistakes. But anyhow, I'll never experience the real, complete Bloodborne. That's a fact that deeply saddens me, and to cope with this, I felt like wondering about what could have been, and talking about this game I love so much. And I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. But I also hope that some interesting interactions happen in the comments. Go wild, talk about the game and in walls of text. But even with everything I've said, I think we should still be grateful and happy that the game is still amazing, and a lot of what I haven't talked about is masterfully executed, and the lore. My god, my love for this game is boundless, and I am thoroughly confident that one day we'll get more of it, in a remaster or a remake perhaps, but that would just be me trying to preserve the past for myself, just trying to feel the love and passion I have for Bloodborne again, and lots of the negative things I talked about in this video could be solved by a sequel or a spiritual successor, and you can replicate the feeling of all the things I want to be added in a different game, in a different way. And with the craving of the community for Bloodborne 2 remake, I feel like we're replicating the mistakes of Dark Souls 3 here. We should remember what the game told us, that trying to preserve things forever is a mistake, because they will only rot and decay. We should burn the painting and let the painter create a new one. And while Bloodborne hasn't even gotten a sequel yet, I could see a timeline where we see a passionless Bloodborne 3 that once again tells us that trying to preserve things eternally is a mistake. We shouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. I think we should let go of Bloodborne. There's a reason why nothing has been announced yet. And yes, this statement could age really poorly if Miyazaki decides to make Bloodborne 2, but only if he does, or someone else that's from software with enough passion. Honestly, I don't think it's good to want Bloodborne 2 for the sake of more Bloodborne. I think we should search for new things that touch the same spot that Bloodborne did, but it doesn't have to be Bloodborne. Isn't that how Bloodborne started? It's not good to want Dark Souls 3 for the sake of Dark Souls. I think we should search for new things that touch the same spot Dark Souls did, but it doesn't have to be Dark Souls. But unfortunately, that's not how history went, and we were left with a questionably good episode of the Souls series, and still today some people are treating Dark Souls 3 like the Antichrist. Do we want such a fate for Bloodborne? I think this should happen. FromSoft creates something new that they want to make, but that resembles Bloodborne's good aspects enough to satisfy the Bloodborne hunger that me and so many people have felt for years. A spiritual successor. That would be perfect. But what happens to Bloodborne then? Will it just be forgotten in the past, never to be fixed and stuck at a lowly 30 FPS? Should it be remastered or remaked then? On the remastered side, I don't want a Dark Souls remastered again. Dark Souls Remastered didn't do anything, it was just a nostalgic cash grab with little to no glitches fixed and slightly upgraded textures and effects. I don't want Bloodborne to have this fate. Just be ported on PC and not even trying to solve or better anything about the game. But at the same time, are the flaws of Bloodborne not a part of it? I think yes, and should a remake even try to fix them? I think that, despite everything, we should remember Bloodborne for what it truly is, an unfinished and flawed masterpiece. But anyhow, while we wait for that, I guess we can gather around a table and play the board game, I guess. Anyways, thank you for watching. Your presence until the end is appreciated. The night and the dream were long. It's been 8 years since the hunt started, and maybe, just maybe, we should accept our death and be freed from this terrible hunter's dream, from the night. Hey you. Farewell, and may you find your worth in the waking world.